Hi, everyone. The topic of today's webinar is how to create photography and videos that help you sell more. In other words, how to take better pictures. I am Alison Zisco, Editor-in-Chief of Home Accents Today, and I am here with Leah Kirkland and Linda Holt. Thank you for joining us. Linda is an interior designer and a former professional photographer who is committed to helping her fellow designers and home industry executives learn to take better pictures with their smartphone. And Leah is the Senior Director of Business Development at Outward, which is a digital technology company that helps people take pictures. So actually, we're going to start with you, Leah, and you can explain a little bit more about what Outward is and what it does.
It's a mouthful. It's a real mouthful. Thank you for even attempting, Allison. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me here today. As Allison mentioned, I'm Leah. I'm with Outward. I've been here at Outward for about 7 years. Now we're a 10-year-old company, which is in Silicon Valley when we're based, ancient. But of course, in the home furnishings industry, we're still a newbie. But we really help to put the power of photography into your hands as a manufacturer, as a retailer. We have a 20 by 20 beauty box that you can roll furniture or accent pieces into. It's all template based, so you press a button and the camera is automatically aligned based on the way that you like to capture things. And what pops out is an image that already has the background cropped and has whatever lighting or shadows applied that's relevant to your business. So want to give you the tools so that you can market with the ideas that you have versus sort of marketing with the images that you're stuck with. So that's what we do at Outward.
Wonderful. And I know you have a lot of clients in the home furnishings business, and that you were telling us earlier that some people have just set up these boxes in their warehouse so that they can roll their product in. And it sounds like they can roll it in and roll it, take the picture and roll it out. Is that?
That's right. It's meant to be used where furniture is flowing, right? Normally, photography studios are very precious. They require booties and a lot of white paint and or sheet. But what we're doing is we're setting up this tool in a warehouse, in a distribution center. Those team members are the ones that are typically operating it. And as furniture flows out of a container, off of a truck, it goes through here. They press a button. It takes about 30 seconds per capture. And then the furniture moves on to whatever warehouse or shipment facility it needs to go. But it's a great way to capture 100% of your line and then have really usable images from that.
Fantastic. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a note that if any of you have questions, you can put them into the chat and that we will get to them at the end of the discussion. And if we run out of time, you can send those to me and I'll give you the information later and we can pass them on to Linda and Leah. So let's get right into the nitty gritty. Can you both talk about what are the most common mistakes that people make when taking pictures for their store, for their web, for social, or all three? Linda, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, I'll start on this one. So I think, and again, because my expertise is the smartphone, I'm mainly going to be addressing that. And I think a couple mistakes that people make with a smartphone is not really giving it the respect that it's due. The cameras are very, very powerful tools, but I think so many people think of it as a subpar, sort of crappy substitute for a digital camera. And it may have been that way, 5, 6 years ago, but today the new phones really are amazing. And it is just as powerful as the most expensive digital camera. It doesn't do everything quite your digital camera is going to do, but you need to think of it as a really workable tool and give some thought to your photo rather than just, sort of I call them walk-bys, where you just like point and shoot and think you're going to get a shot. So I think you need to sort of just switch your mindset. Pretend it's a $1,200 thing in your hand give it some thought, think about your background, think about the lighting, and treat it as if you were using a very expensive camera. So I think that's one mistake, is that people just think it's a, poor substitute for the quote real thing. I also think a big mistake is not having a sort of a focal point, or what are you actually trying to show the viewer? Is it if it's the object itself, then you want to get in close. So you don't want to have a lot of distracting things in the background, and then it's busy. Then the person doing the photo doesn't really know what they're looking at or what's in the photo. So I think for social media, especially because we're looking at images on our phone, so it's a very small piece of real estate to grab someone's attention, I think you want to get in close to what you're photographing. And I also think the last thing I would say, I think the big mistake people make is not taking control of the exposure and the focus yourself and relying on the phone to do it. Because sometimes it looks bang on, you're outside, the light meter does a really good job of getting it right. But if you're inside a darker space or in a showroom, then you really need to take control of yourself and learn how to manually override the camera's light meter and set the lighting, the exposure yourself, as well as the focus yourself.
Very good. Okay, we'll go into the detail on those tips in a minute. But Leah, do you have anything to add in terms of what are common mistakes?
The age-old mistake of muting. Yes, I have learned so much from Linda being on these. So I've actually employed some of her tips and tools in between the last webinar we did together. So really great tips. I would say kind of from a product standpoint, I think one of the big things that we end up missing is we forget to tell the story. I think this industry is so great at developing product and knowing how to sell that product to someone in person, that all of a sudden when we get behind the lens, we forget about what that story is. What are the features that make this great? What are the angles that I might need to highlight? How would I style this item to use it? And so I think that forgetting about the story and forgetting about how to really tell a story through your images is something that I see mistakes being made left and right. I think also thinking through variety, right? If people are really trying to get a sense of an object, they really want to see it in various ways, right? They might want to see it styled with something. They might want to see it on a background. They might want to see it on its own so that they can really craft an idea of what that item actually is. So showing some variety, I think, is really important. And also showing angles and showing all of the angles, right? I feel like this is certainly true in furniture, but also like accent furniture. Open concept floor plans are, what most homes have. And so the way that furniture is being placed, you're seeing it from all different angles. So you see it, when you come in from one room, you might see the front of it. When you come in from another room, you may see the side. When you're in the room, you may see the back. So you really want to make sure that you're giving a consumer all of the angles so they know exactly where they can put that piece of furniture and what it's going to look like from each of those vantage points.
Very good point. So not just head-on shots,
That's right.
The front only.
Exactly.
Very good.
Exactly.
So, Linda, you touched on a few things. Let's go dive a little deeper into those points that you mentioned, and maybe you can give us some advice and recommendations for how to take a better picture when we consider the light, when we consider the distance and so forth.
Sure. Well, I think as far as controlling the lighting, meaning if your photo is too dark or too light, for those people that don't know, there's two ways to override the in-camera light meter. The first way, and this is whether or not you own an iPhone or an Android, it's the same for all phones. You can tap on the phone screen, on the back of the camera phone screen, exactly where you want the exposure to be. So if you have maybe a little bit of backlighting and you have something, say a small table, and it's looking really dark because the light meter is going to expose for that bright window, then if you tap your finger on the small table, that was telling the in-camera light meter expose here. So then that will brighten up what you want to photograph, and everything else will follow as it should. So you can tap on it, but you can also, if you want, you can tap your finger anywhere on the screen, tap and hold, and On the iPhone, a yellow box will come up, and on Android, a yellow circle will appear. And on the iPhone, if you slide your finger up or down the screen, you control the exposure. So you can make it look lighter if you slide your finger up the screen, or you can darken it by sliding your finger down the screen. And for Android, it's left to right. So you can brighten it by going to the right, darken it by going to the left. So that way you have full control over the exposure, which is, lighting is really the most important thing for getting a good photo. If you have dark, lighting, you don't have a good image. So I'd say control the lighting. That's number one.
Can I ask you a question? Because I myself have to take pictures in showrooms. And one of the, if you have very highly reflective objects and you have spotlights, now you're taking, it's really hard. Do you have any advice on how to avoid, those spots, those white spots that show up?
There is nothing you can do to avoid them other than asking the person in the showroom if they'll turn off those spotlights for 5 seconds while you get a shot. There's nothing you can do. There's spotlights, it's the lighting. But if it was really, you're going to be doing a lot of that, then I suggest going onto Amazon and buying a small reflector. They're collapsible, and you can get them, so they collapse to this big. And I don't know if you know what a reflector is, but like one side is usually white, the other side is gold, and they pop open. You can hold the reflector above, or ask someone to hold it right above the object. So the light will still come through the reflector, but it will totally even out the lighting. So that's one trick you can do. If you're going to be doing a lot of this and it's important to you, then just invest in, they're like, under $20, well, like $29.99 maybe for a small one, or even $19.99. And then just again, hold it over the object. So you're blocking that spotlight, but the light will still filter through the fabric, but it will even out everything and you won't get those hot spots.
Oh, good to know. And I'm sorry, what's that called again?
It's called a reflector.
Reflector. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Good to know. I'm sorry. And you had some other tips and suggestions.
Besides getting the exposure right, I think, again, it's really important that you check your background, especially if you're shooting in a showroom. You don't want an exit sign, sitting right above, where the furniture is you're photographing, or whatever it is you're photographing. People walking in and out of the background. Just take a moment and shoot it, and then look at the back, because sometimes when we're in the room 3D, we don't see things that are way in the background, but when it's compressed into a 2D photograph, everything from the background is right there. So I think checking the background is something else really important to do that'll immediately improve images, just by making sure you don't have anything distracting in the background.
Makes sense. And I know you've talked about zooming, so yeah, talk about that for a moment.
Sure. So another mistake people make is if they don't have a designated zoom lens on their camera. The newer ones do, but the old ones don't. It's only within the last year, I think, that the zoom lenses have actually made it onto the phones, and that is actually called optical zoom. What that means is if you switch to using that lens, you're not going to get any degradation of your photo because you're actually switching lenses. Imagine that, what professionals do with their digital cameras, they take off one lens, they put on another lens. This is the smartphone's answer to that. However, if people don't have the zoom lens and they want to get in closer, almost everybody does the same thing. They pinch with their fingers to get in closer to what they want to shoot, and they basically are doing nothing but degrading the image. They're not really zooming in. They think they are, but all they're doing is blowing up the pixels. So if you can't, if you don't have the telephoto, you always want to remember to zoom with your feet, not with your fingers. So walk in closer and don't just pinch out, because you're just going to ruin your photograph. But if for some reason you can't walk in closer, maybe you're standing on a bridge and there's, something in front of you, then it's better not to zoom with your fingers. Instead, shoot it as it is, and then later crop to what you want. You'll still get a little bit of degradation, but not nearly as much as pinching out with your fingers and blowing that image up and blowing up those pixels.
On a related note, if you're taking a picture of a product surrounded by other products in a showroom, for instance, and you want to focus on one, you know you're going to crop it eventually, like later on. Is it better to, I assume, to leave as much room as possible around the image so that you can crop it in later? Or should you
Well,
go in as tight as you can in the first place?
it depends how you're going to use it. I would leave a little bit of room around it, but each time you crop, you are degrading the image a little bit. For social media, no one's going to know, it's fine. But if you're going to be putting this on your website, you're going to want a little higher quality. So if you can frame it exactly how you want the end result to look, then that would be the first choice. But if not, then yeah, add a little bit of room around it and then you can crop in later.
Okay, good to know. You mentioned the camera lenses, and I'm one of those people that has, one.
Yep.
I assume that it's obvious to those who have multiple lenses how to use them and how to manipulate them.
Yeah, the cameras, most cameras now, the new ones all have 3 lenses. It's a wide angle lens, which will say 0.5. It's the default lens, which you have, which everybody has, that will say 1x. That's just the normal default lens it'll open to. And then there's the telephoto. If they have the 3 lenses on the back, you can tell if you have those 3. And when you go to take a picture, along the bottom, it'll give you the choice of 0.5x, 1x, or whatever your telephoto is. Some people have 2.5x, some people have 3x. Then you would just click on it and it switches. So each lens is its own separate lens.
Okay, got it. Very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you. Leah, would you have anything? What kind of tips would you give to people for taking better pictures? You're muted.
I've done it again. We were just talking before this about how we're terrified of our dogs making noise in the midst of this. So I've been trying to foolproof, and now I've tricked myself. Apologies for that. So
No worries.
what I would say is ways to take great photos. I think, Linda tends to be focused in these on really practical tips of using a phone. I tend to be focused on kind of what images are coming out of this and from a technology standpoint. And so what I would say, the things that you want to see when you're taking an image is you want to make sure that you're showing scale in some way. So especially important for accent furniture, right? I think every consumer has perhaps had a bad moment where they've purchased an item from an online retailer thinking that it's like a real size accent chair and it's like a toddler chair. And they didn't realize it because, who knows what dimensions mean, right? Without like pulling out a ruler. So show scale, that way they'll know, where they can put it, and it will confirm that that's the piece that they think it is. It's the size that they think it is. It doesn't make the consumer jump and do a lot of work. I think the other thing that we can do is really craft some ideas on how you might style that item. So if it's an accent piece, what other pieces might you put with it? Is this going to be the tall piece? Is this going to be the short piece? What other colors might this work with? So a little bit of inspiration in the way that you might style it. And I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but make sure you're showing all the different angles and kind of the relevant views of that item. So if it's a vase, that even means like capturing it from the top, right? How big is the mouth of that? Does it, is there some dimension to it, or is it a straight cylinder? So those different angles will give the consumer an idea of at least confirming what their assumption is on the item, and it can really help them to get a better feel for it, whether it be on social or on your website or in print, and really help drive them to whatever conversion means.
You mentioned styling products. Do you advocate always styling a product, or is it better to have only styled product, only silhouetted product, or a mix of both?
Yeah, I think people will go to the death over their opinion on this. And so what I would say is include them all. And so if you have the ability to do so, I think that having an item in a silo on its own, an item in an environment, and then an item styled really gives the consumer, whomever is viewing that, the full breadth of information they need about the item, so that they're not making any false assumptions. So I will tell you, I have run across people who are like, you know, Silo on white all day, every day. I have also been in extensive meetings where people are arguing for environments and backgrounds. I think it's all important to tell that story and tell the story about how the item is going to interact with whatever environment the consumer might be putting it in. So you can do them, include them all.
Mhm. You know, it's interesting from my perspective as an editor, we often get that question. Do you want silos or do you want styled? And I give them the same answer. It's like, send us both, because we use different images in different ways and for different purposes. So again, from a magazine standpoint, I totally agree with you.
And I will tell you, it has been A/B tested by our parent company, and it's come out both ways. So I think for some of the brands, silos perform better. For some of the brands, environments perform better. And all that means to me is that you really can't go wrong, but having them both is going to really ensure that the consumer is satisfied.
Makes sense. Good advice. Just to note, Leah mentioned parent company, which would be Williams-Sonoma.
Yes, we are owned. So we've got Pottery Barn, their whole family, West Elm, Rejuvenation, Mark and Graham. There are all sorts of different companies within that, but we do eke some data out so that we can make sure that the products that we're developing are staying in tune with consumers.
Suitable for them, right? Leah, you also talked about storytelling. I think that's an important part of any photography. Anything else you want to add about, you know, I think that's what this is all about, right? Is the story behind the product. And are there ways, technical ways or conceptual ways to highlight, again, the story of the product?
Yeah, I think the way that I might think about it, and I feel for suppliers and retailers in our industry today, because there are so many channels with which stories need to be told. And what I might do is look at those independently and say, okay, in print, this is a great medium to kind of showcase a product in an editorial way. So I might be able to show something that's in an environment that's a little bit floofier, that I can really style up. That showcases well in print. I think when you go to social media, you want to really be inspired, right, as a user. So you want something that has a background that's styled together, that people can kind of get a feel for how the item might be used and the versatility of that item, right? So styling it in different ways in different environments. And then certainly on your website, you're really telling a story, whether you're trying to convert on there, or whether you're trying to do that in an in-person retail environment, you're at least casting the same vision, that you want to have more variety. People want to see it in the background. They want to be inspired, but they also want to know that what they're purchasing matches what they're assuming it looks like. So you want to have angles, silhouettes, environments on your website, so that the consumer knows that they can really trust you and trust that product.
Linda, do you have any technical tips or the difference between shooting for social versus shooting for either the web or print or any other medium?
Well, the only thing I would say about social is what I touched on earlier. People are looking at social media on their phones. So again, you have a very small piece of real estate of where you're going to post that photo. And if it doesn't hit them right off, if it's not clear, if they don't know what they're looking at, they're just going to scroll on by. So if you want to capture their attention, you really need to have a clear, well-lit image of what it is you're trying to show them. Sort of fill the frame would really be the general rule. Fill the frame with your product. And then on the website, of course, if they could show it in a room, then that's a little different. But for social media, definitely you want to fill the frame is my feeling.
Very good. So one thing that's generating a lot of conversation in the industry is 2D and 3D product photography. And can you touch a little bit on this? I guess, Leah, this would be your
Yeah, absolutely. So we get this question a lot, and the tool that we developed, the self-serve tool, is producing 2D image files, right, for use in, whatever channel you might use them, different resolution file types. You can use them for print, social, website, etc. Our previous life and the work that we do with our parent company is 3D, right? And 3D has a lot of different applications. And so we kind of know both worlds. And what we found from consumer research and in looking at conversion rates is the silhouettes and kind of the 2D images are really necessary when consumers are sort of at the top of that funnel, right? A funnel looks like that inverted triangle. And they're really looking at images. They're looking at images that inspire them. They're looking for a very specific item. And they're using purely 2D images to do that. 2D images are also those that are used in retargeting ads that follow you around. And all of that sort of leads to the fact that your product page is really your new homepage, right? We know from traffic that, at least at our parent too, 99% of traffic is coming in through a product page now versus a homepage. And that's because of all of that, because people are so good at searching for exactly what they want, because Google's so good at breaking things down to a product page instead of just a home page. And there's not a lot of patience for searching around on a website to figure out what you're looking for. So we know that those 2D images really help drive that top of the funnel. We also know that towards the bottom of the funnel, people really want, and consumers really want, the ability to interact with items, to be able to customize it in some way, to be able to use AR. And I think one of the mistakes that we tend to see is that brands might forget that, and you land on a product page that you have an image that you can flip around, but consumers aren't ready yet. They're not ready to see it like that. You really need the 2D images to help drive them down to that interactivity. And then we know once you get the interactivity, once you get the AR, which also seems to be really effective, that really helps to drive them to the finish line once they've confirmed that that's the item that they're looking for.
Very helpful. Thank you. Thank you. So we've given a lot of tips and advice. I think perhaps it's also worth mentioning, what are your views on perfection versus the beauties of imperfection? Do people, when they're going to take a picture, we don't want people to feel overwhelmed. What are your thoughts? Linda, what would you advise in that regard?
I think it depends. I think if they are looking for a highly curated feed, say in Instagram, they really do want beautiful imagery. However, stories is for whatever. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't edit them. Stories is just behind the scenes. People love that. They love the imperfection. You could just riff as you're walking through a showroom and then turn the phone around. That's where you can just be yourself. Don't worry about the quality because it's in stories. And even with reels, same way. The only place I think it's important to really have beautiful imagery is in your feed itself, just on the individual feed.
I think this is probably a good point to mention to all of you that Linda is going to be giving a class at High Point Market later this month about Instagram Reels. Is that correct?
Yes, creating Instagram Reels. Yep, it's Friday, so the day before market starts at Universal Furniture.
Great. And that's something that's easier to do, as you mentioned earlier before the program.
Yeah, you really have to show people, touch here and do this, and show them what you're doing to create it. It's really hard to do it verbally.
Understand. Well, if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to send them to me. You can email them to me and I will pass them on to Leah and to Linda. My email address is azisco@bridgetowermedia.com. So that's Z like zebra, ISKO @bridgetowermedia, all one word.com. But thank you both very much. As we head to market, whether it's High Point Market or the upcoming winter markets, you've given us so many really valuable and practical tips that I just appreciate it very much. And I'm going to keep all of these things in mind when I've got my phone camera, which is a very valuable tool.
It is. And when you get the new one, you'll be amazed at how much powerful it is. What model do you have now?
Okay, well,
You
I'm
know,
also embarrassed to admit.
you don't know. That's fine, but you will notice a huge
I have an
difference.
8. I have an
Okay,
8.
you'll notice a huge difference when you upgrade.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Allison, I think we do have one question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not see it.
I can read it. I have
Yes,
it
if I was going to say, Lee, if you don't mind.
if I can flip the script on you.
Yes, oh, by all means.
Yeah, no, this is the question is about scale, and this is from one of the audience members. I design and construct blankets and throws with multiple weaves and prints. The standard photos are couch arms or ladders. How can I show more of the scale and style? Does the use of a person in situ help the story? And she's focusing mainly on her website. I don't know, Linda, do you want to?
I would say she could get creative, especially on social media. She could hire a model to have the throw, over her shoulders. She could, if it's smaller, she could put it over a dog. I mean, she could have fun with this, but put a person or an animal or something in the image. Because I think, again, like sofa arms, which is so stereotypical that you see the throws, it's hard to really see what the throw is like. And it sounds like, because it's multiple textures and weavings, she really wants to show that off. So that is when a video would really be really beautiful. She could pan in, over the throw and show all the different, textures as you move along. So those are just a couple of ideas rather than the ladder or the arm of the sofa.
I think with throws and blankets too, you can almost photograph them like rugs. Lay them out fully, and that way somebody can really get a feel for like what the edges look like, what the size of the item is, and maybe it could be a fun way to brand it. If you have something in your brand where it would make sense to have an object that is like next to the throw or on the throw each time, that will help the user understand scale from blanket to blanket, throw to throw. But I think that would be interesting too, is to almost look at the way that rugs are photographed, because they have to solve this problem too of trying to promote scale and style. But maybe even laying it out would be a great way to kind of capture the full essence of it.
Very good. Okay, Lee, I'm going to ask you if you see any more questions.
Oh, yep, I do. So any ideas for posting for a showroom? We don't sell in line, just in store. How do I communicate to my client how important photos are? They only do 1 to 2 photo updates a year of the showroom, and I am requesting to do every few months. They are always getting new inventory, but don't always have updated imagery.
Do they tell you why they don't want to do it? I mean, they should be doing it all the time, especially if they're on social media. They could be doing, daily finds or, our pick of the week. And is it because maybe their employees are uncomfortable taking the photos? So, and there's a lot of reasons why they're not posting, but they definitely should be posting. I agree with you.
I think one of Salone's last, or when Allison, one of your last question was, perfection or just get it out there.
Right.
And I feel like that has held up so many brands because they're scared that they either have to do something at this incredibly large scale and they have to have like a whole program associated with it. But this would be a great thing to say, like, let's just get started. Right. And it's as easy as Linda, as Linda says, you have a magical camera right here. And I feel like, the way that you might communicate this is taking some images and putting them out there and just showing how easy it is to at least get started, so that you can get the ball rolling on it. And perhaps you show versus trying to convince.
Very good. Any other questions?
I think those are all of the tricks that I have in my hat. But yes, I think those are all the questions, which are great. And as Allison mentioned, if there are any questions after, send them her way.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Linda, for participating. Again, giving great tips, great advice, and great inspiration because market's just around the corner. There's another one always around the corner, and we're going to put those tips to good use.